If Pedro Sanchez stays on this course, there could be a conflict with Israel in some way, even if it's just diplomatic.
A diplomatic conflict is already underway, along with political and economic ones. The boycott that Sanchez is trying to impose on Israel affects Spain much more in terms of security and defense than it protects you. For example, a small example in the Parcos, your credit cards, to prevent them from being stolen, use extended systems. If Pedro Sanchez gets rid of this, everyone becomes vulnerable. We're talking about proportions, it's quite significant for Spain. Maybe they lose the economic part of losing a customer, of course, but the consequences are much more serious for that customer. So, yes, I think Spain wins. I don't think it wins much. What does Pedro Sanchez gain? I think he's the one who ends up winning. He has so many cases involving his wife. His brother has so many that always, and here the public can put this to the test. Whenever you see a headline accusing Pedro Sanchez right away, what's the reaction? Pedro Sanchez? Or did the scandal come from gas? Why? Because he has, like you say, all these people who are going to applaud him and come out and distract from the issue. So, and this happens in all the dictatorships that Pedro Sanchez democratically collected, but it's the phenomenon of dictatorships that there's always an external enemy. A good example is Maduro, who is now building ties with Sanchez. But what does Maduro do? Is it the fault of the Yankees and the oligarchies? Oligarchies start their whole speech, but the truth is that Venezuela is in trouble. If you notice, there are two problems. That's just how things are for me now. But Maduro just blames others. Sanchez is using the same manual strategy. No matter what problems he always has that joker to pull out of his sleeve. And that's the supposed genocide by Israel. So I think that here in Doha, in Spain, the one who benefits is Sanchez and his political or personal interest.
How is the situation right now in Israel itself? How do you perceive things since the ceasefire agreement was signed? Thanks to Trump and other countries as well, and to yourselves, who in the end accepted an agreement. How is this agreement perceived in the atmosphere, in Israeli society? Do you trust in the yes?
There's great joy for the hostages who returned alive, but some did not survive. But in general, a large part of the Israeli population sees the agreement as unfavorable. It's true that Israel won in many aspects. Digitally, practically in agreement. Yes, the balance is favorable, but the consequence released, and there is a disproportionality. That they would release 20 kidnapped Israelis who were alive, maybe they would release 2,000 convicted terrorists, many of whom were serving life sentences. We're talking about the most nefarious people you can imagine, people with many crimes to their names, and now they're being set free because maybe we value life above all else. But there's a mistake that people often believe in the West. I saw a headline saying, finally peace, but there's no peace here. In Islam, peace doesn't exist, and that's another religious aspect that's very common. But I think it's important to involve people who know a bit more about religious activity and not just politics. In Islam, peace agreements as such don't exist. Instead, there's something called hutna. They're like temporary agreements that Muslims can make with non-believers. And if the Muslim is in a position of superiority, can he break the agreement? Since right now Israel is in a position of military superiority, they're never really in hutna. But their desire to destroy Israel, to destroy the society, is still there. Well, we're not naive. We know that they're never going to stop rearming. It's just a matter of time before the next one comes. I don't know if it'll be years or years, I don't know, but it's going to happen. There's no way out of this. Because the problem with ideologies, with radicalism, is that you can't fight so many ideologies. You fight with another ideology. So until we find this other ideology, which I think already exists, this other ideology to counteract Islamist radicalism, because it's a matter of tennis, not Africa, but until Islamic ideology is fought with another ideology, we're going to stay in this situation. That's why we believe on one hand that we're very happy, and on the other hand, there's the bitter pill that the war isn't over.
Let's say you're happy because there's a pause, let's put it that way. But being aware that it's something temporary, that things will go back to how they were. As we say in Spain, the goat always returns to the mountain in the end.
Yes, the goat always goes back to the mountain.
So in the end, they may be calm now, but there will come a point when they will attack again. The thing is, it's for you. For the Israelis, I understand it must be very worrying to be constantly living with that tension nowadays. Militarily and on many other levels, I am above them. But of course, I can't let my guard down for even a second because at the slightest slip, they'll do another October 7th to me. Exactly.
In Israel, people sleep with one eye open, and that's proof of it. For example, many times the fact that Israel has a wall that separates has been criticized, saying it can't have a discriminatory wall. In fact, only 3% is actually a wall. Most of it is a fence you can jump over. And as you said, just a couple of hours with a breach in that fence was enough. And it was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. That's why we always need to stay alert. And King David already said it in the Psalms, where he says that God blesses his people. God will give his people strength, and so God will bless his people with peace, because peace comes through being strong. That is the Middle East. I know that the historical process that the West has gone through is that after having 2 world wars, they came to the conclusion that there should be no more wars. So did they do all that? This is the system of European unions. This utopia will soon collapse as they continue to embrace an ideology that does not want to see European functions, which is the case. All these passive migrations, but what about the case of the Middle East? They still haven't reached that national or tribal maturity. Unfortunately, many still believe my tribe must be stronger than the neighboring tribe. So it's dealt with, so they fight, so on. That's the neighborhood we got. Israel, which ironically, Israel is surrounded by all this crazy ideology. What Europe is doing is taking the crazy people from the Middle East and bringing them to live in Europe. I don't understand those social suicides they're committing, but well, that's how it is.
It doesn't make any sense. What's happening in Spain is totally irrational, and the average Spaniard is so obtuse. Like I said, everyone thinks you guys are bad. In fact, I've received some criticism. When I posted online about coming, I only said an Israeli soldier was coming to the universe, not that it was you. Most people were very nice. Thank you so much for bringing this kind of person. But there was also some criticism like, how can you bring genocidal people to your channel? I don't care, It doesn't matter to me at all. They can say whatever they want. I bring whoever I want to my universe. I'm very clear that it's most important for people to see the reality of what's happening to us. Imagine if in Israel, Hamas wasn't what it is, wasn't a terrorist group, wasn't like that. But let's say they had some interest looking ahead to the next 10 or 15 years, and you start letting them enter Israel, and they move through Israeli territories in a calm way, because that's all they're doing. Sometimes they steal, maybe, they rape, they kill sometimes, but not as extreme as what you've experienced. And the Israeli national media starts to cover it up. That's what's happening in Spain today. The traditional media doesn't talk about it. Many people say that channels like mine help others stay informed about current news. Because on television, they don't talk about it. Everything is biased and manipulated. What will happen when we finally realize it? Will we have Hamas here? Allow me to point out the difference. Obviously, your situation is much worse. We'll have Hamas inside Spain outnumbering us. Because nowadays, if you go to any school or high school, there are more foreigners than Spaniards. There are many good people, many who come and contribute. Right in front of my studio, there's a black guy who works. I don't know where he's from, but he works and contributes. There are a lot of people who contribute, but there are others who don't. They come to steal, commit crimes, kill people, and face no consequences. So Spain is a country that sooner or later we're going to have to flee from, and that's being allowed to happen. Sanchez, my main fear is that something like the flotilla incident will happen again and someone will get hurt. And Sanchez might lose his mind and confront a country like Israel, which could send us all to the guillotine because you are infinitely stronger and more powerful than we are. Because Spain, militarily, isn't even worth shotgun shells. And after all, you haven't done anything bad to us, if you know what I mean. We're reaching a
point where Sanchez, people aren't thinking, I think Sanchez understands he's not going to get into that. Why? Because there was a hint of that. Remember, this fleet that Sanchez said slams the table. We're going to protect the fleet and we're going to send a warship with the Spaniards' money. I don't know if people know how much.
It cost €1 million?
€1 million. They sent out a warship, a lot of money. And that Sanchez barely made it to the edge. Does he know that it could have been much more heated? And I say, oops, should we stop here then? I think there's also awareness. I think the Spanish army understood very well that it wasn't all about desire. Sanchez, I think the struggle was more internal, like the debate about whether to continue with this ship. I think the army put a stop to Sanchez. But what happened now is that Sanchez is not going to go that far. because it's more of a political survival strategy. What you say about migration, honestly, I'm not completely against migration. Why? Because we are all one people.
Do you know what we've had?
I would say that you had to be at the mercy of the nations that have received us. And those who hosted us or did us good, we were able to live in those nations. And those who expelled us and did negative things, well, no. So that's why I don't. But the question is, if this immigrant, or you say like your neighbor, is he going to contribute? Or is it the case that we see that it's not like that? And the truth is that it only takes very few to do something very serious. That is to say, in the end, history is not moved by the lukewarm. Who are the ones that just stand by with their arms crossed as spectators, watching the world go by? In the end, the ones who move history are the people who decide to take a step that's a little crazier than the rest. Think about the right, the left, Islamic radicalism, and it only takes a small group to do something truly catastrophic. So, well, that's the big dilemma. Let's say that in Spain and in Europe, there aren't really any parameters to measure who comes in and who doesn't. If there were, well, I think the situation would be something so crazy, but there isn't. There's no filter.
If someone comes from outside, you have to help them. You give them food. If you can give them housing, you do. But then when they're already in a stable situation, 6 months or a year, I'm not sure, but they should contribute before we integrate them into society. If they commit a crime, they should return to their country. The richest countries in the world have a very specific immigration policy. If you come to contribute, you stay. If you don't come to contribute, you go. If you come to cost me money, you go. I don't intend to be that strict either. But if you're going to commit crimes or cost me money because you're going to do bad things, to my grandma, my neighbor, or anyone else. If you plan to attack Israelis here because you believe they're killing children in Palestine, then you should leave this country. And that's the biggest problem we're having here in Spain. People are very narrow-minded, and it's extremely difficult to fight against it. Those who have a reasonable mindset are afraid of those who, as we say here, are a few fries short of a happy meal. Those whose brains just can't handle more. And they think that Netanyahu is Hitler, that the Palestinians, that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. I've even seen people say that Hamas is just a political party. That's it. I've seen that on social media, and you just think, how can someone, an adult, say such nonsense? They say it so confidently, I just can't understand it, my friend.
Being completely honest, they don't initially present themselves as a political party, but they clearly have a terrorist branch. But that's part of the perspective that the West doesn't always see, because the West separates itself. Since politics and religion are like two separate spheres, Westerners see them as two separate spheres. So yes, here the caliphate, that is the idea, the aspiration to create a global hegemony, is present here. The military, political, and religious aspects go hand in hand. Everything goes together. Social action, all of that goes hand in hand. That's why it always fulfills both the political aspect and the terrorist aspect. And the Gazan doesn't see any difference or problem with this. So these are truths that complement each other to this day.
How do you see the future, Jacob? How do you see the current situation looking ahead? I don't know, in a year, 2, 3, for example, the next 3 years, I don't know.
That's the hardest question in the Middle East. You can't know what's going to happen next week. Nobody knows. Like, someone was going to Sevilla 2 weeks ago, was going to see them in the village, and suddenly last week this came back. In a couple of days it came back. I don't know. Well, for the guys, is it really that volatile? The Middle East now, for example, with the summit in San Egypt, what's going to happen? Turkey, which is a NATO country, Turkey that has been such a substitute for Israel, what's going to happen? Are they suddenly going to take Sicily? What's going to happen? So, what's going to happen? I don't know. What I do know is that Israel, we are an eternal people. We are a people who have been here for many, many millennia. Are we going to stay here? And it just so happens that the enemies of Israel, those who have tried to destroy them throughout history, are gone. They're dust. They're in museums, it's archaeology, and the same thing will happen with the enemies of Israel. It's a bitter job. Pedro Sanchez is now part of the history of the Jewish people, and Paramar too, and that's how it's going to be. We are a people with a very strong historical memory. We even remember dates, days, names, and Pedro Sanchez chose to remain in history. And when all this is over and Spain is a free nation again and full of joy like that and of equality, I truly believe that we are going to remember Pedro Sanchez as one of the disastrous ones who almost destroyed Spain. And I hope what you suggest doesn't happen. The question is, how do you see Spain in these next 2 years? Will you have to carry out a reconquest? I mean, I don't know if these people have read a bit of history, but Spain has already gone through this. Spain, they lost half of the Iberian Peninsula and had to forcibly sit back down on one of their ancestors who were settled there. So I don't know if today's Spain will have to go through a reconquest, because that's the responsibility of today's government. Inheriting a difficult Spain tomorrow is a saying, right? There are settled, gentle cultures with kisses.
Here we're going to have it tough in Spain, and I still have hope that people will start to open their eyes and see the reality of things. Blessings, Jacob. What will be the next step after all the kidnapped people arrive? Good question.
What Donald Trump did was propose a plan with 21 points, and part of those points is eventually ending the reconstruction of Gaza. And the reconstruction implies that Hamas disarms. Or is the radicalization test, like the denazification test after World War II, not possible? The Hamas test was discarded. And also that multinational forces come in, like those from the United States, so that it isn't Israel who has to ask for it, but rather that it be an army made up of Arab countries. Yes, like if a miracle saves, and so be it. I mean, it's a series of steps that must lead to Gaza becoming a livable place without radicalism. In my opinion, it's naive. This is going to happen. I think they'll just get into the business they saw in ruins. And Donald Trump is a builder. He's a man who comes from real estate. So he said, oh, here's this opportunity. I have my Qatari friends. I have my miracle friends. Let's rebuild Gaza, the business, the world, in any case, the Europeans. Pedro Sanchez is going to give us millions from Spanish taxpayers because he has to do the good deed of rebuilding, which we do. The big business that the world hasn't exploited yet. Europe is going to donate. It's going to donate. It's going to donate all this time. Europe is going to donate millions. Yes, I thank him and everything. But now, in the reconstruction of expenses, it is indeed going in that direction.
My friend, let me know if you want to add anything or if we missed something.
Yes, I do, to separate as well. First of all, thank you again for the invitation, and thanks to the audience who has watched us. I believe the future depends on you. There are people who feel that. I do believe we are the tip of the spear in the fight, but also the rest of the spear. It's you. You are the ones who hold it. That's why I believe the future depends a lot on you. Be good people, that there is a better world. Respect your elders, young people. Make a better world. Transform the world in a real way, like the other narratives. And is it really the vision of the prophets of Isabel Cesar? A better world? We don't aspire to a global caliphate and repression. A better world? I think it depends on you, that's all. Best regards.
Jacob, it has truly been, I tell you, a real pleasure. I really appreciate you being here. I would love it.